Welcome to Past Paradise, where we explore history's darkest times' most gripping stories. Here's the extraordinary account of Charles Lightoller, the Titanic's most senior surviving officer who stayed on the ship to the end. Lightoller's heroics and leadership under adversity inspire in 2024. Lightoller showed bravery and sacrificed his safety as the Titanic sank. Explore the newest facts and insights into his life, including his incredible choice to stay aboard the Titanic to rescue as many lives as possible. The tale of a man who persevered in the face of calamity will show that genuine courage has no limits. Designed to be great. Charles Herbert Lightoller never blended in with the rest of the group. The youngster sensed at an early age that he was meant for greatness and that he was different from his contemporaries. Lightoller was born in 1874 into a family of cotton mill workers in Lancashire, England. When he was 10 years old, his father moved to New Zealand, and his mother passed away soon after giving birth, leaving the small child with his family. At 13, the young lad engaged in a marine apprenticeship to escape industrial employment and succeed. In the years that followed, he almost died several times due to the perilous nature of seafaring at the period. He only survived odd storms and malaria episodes by sheer luck. Sadly, Lightoller's life was about to become much more difficult. Discovering his position. In his early nautical career, he had a string of mishaps where he consistently overcame the odds. Through his employment, he traveled outside England more often than most people would in a lifetime, seeing places like Australia, Brazil, and India before turning 20. Even though Lightoller's life appeared exciting, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. On his second journey, the young sailor was amid a fierce storm in the South Atlantic Ocean, and their ship almost capsized. Luckily, the crew managed to reach a Rio de Janeiro harbor. But the soldiers were no safer than they had been on board the sinking ship, with a smallpox epidemic sweeping the city. Later, after saving the day when the coal stocks on another ship caught fire, Lightoller was promoted from third mate to second. The young guy saved the lives of everybody on board by acting quickly to extinguish the fire. Lightoller was already establishing himself as a hero at such a young age. The future hero. By 1895, Lightoller had reached the age of 21, and he was already more seasoned than others in his industry. He was tired of the terror that came with his profession since he had been dangerously close to death more than 3 times. Thus, although Lightoller was successful on sailing ships, he was prepared to use his skills elsewhere. He decided to leave the mayhem of sailboats behind and start working for the Royal Mail Service aboard steamships. The young seafarer found that the task fit him well and advanced rapidly in his new field. Many illnesses were rife during this period due to inadequate sanitation and health practices in certain regions of the globe. And wherever Lightoller looked, disasters seemed to find him. He almost died from malaria on the West African coast after working for the RMS for 3 years. He was never able to get a break. Following his astonishing recovery from malaria, the young guy decided to cross the Atlantic for a fresh start. Explorations on dry land. Charles Lightoller gave up his sea legs in favor of a landlocked existence as the 19th century ended. Lightoller was enthralled by the concept of riches, as had many others at the time. The young guy was moving up the ranks in his profession fast, but he had higher goals in mind. He crossed the Atlantic to the Klondike Gold Rush in Canada's Yukon Territory. Sadly, Lightoller was only one of nearly 100,000 others with the same thought. He was obliged to abandon the project as it was certain to fail and was left with nothing. Lightoller transitioned from his prior life at sea to become a cowboy in Alberta to earn some money and bring himself back to England. His tenure in this position was also brief, and he was left homeless, traveling by train back to America before returning to his home in England. From rancher to cattleman. After leaving North America's disappointments behind, Lightoller secured employment as a cow wrangler and paid for his journey home on a cattle ferry headed for England. When the young guy went home in 1899, he had nothing. But he didn't give up. The young guy has often shown resilience. Resuming his maritime career, he obtained employment in lower-level roles on more livestock ships. This was a pleasant step forward for the impoverished guy, but he was again on the wrong track. Lightoller was finally able to rise through the ranks once again, but it took some time. He was hired in 1900 as the fourth mate on the SS Medic for the British maritime company White Star Company. His career in the maritime industry was restarted by this new employment, and he soon rose the ranks by finding employment on various ships. From Australia, warm regards. Ships operated by White Star Line regularly connected Australia, North America, and the United Kingdom. Lightoller met a beautiful young lady named Sylvia Wilson in 1903 while traveling to Australia. Wilson was leaving for her own country. The couple quickly got married in Sydney after falling deeply in love. On Lightoller's subsequent journey back to England, Sylvia Wilson joined him, and they started a life together. The couple soon became comfortable in their new life in England and, after a few years, had their first kid. He often had to leave his house to do his responsibilities at sea, and he spent much time apart from his family. Lightoller's name will go down in history books forever. It was 1912 when he was ready to become involved in one of the most notorious maritime tragedies ever. The Titanic RMS. Charles Lightoller, still employed by White Star Line, was assigned as a second officer for the first voyage of their newest ocean liner, the RMS Titanic. He was 38 years old now and a seasoned sailor. Amidst the enthusiasm around the Titanic's maiden voyage, the management was keen to showcase its strongest team and gathered its most seasoned members. Under Captain Edward J. Smith's command, the crew sailed confidently from England to New York. Charles Blair's prior job had been assumed by Charles Lightoller. Lightoller had shown himself capable and performed well as acting first officer during the Titanic's sea trials. Charles Blair was kicked from the crew and took the binocular case key with him. Once the ship sailed, the crew discovered they were missing the key. Not too concerned, Lightoller told his captain he would buy new binoculars when the ship reached New York. Everything went according to plan on the first day at sea, and later in the evening, Lightoller withdrew to his cabin after finishing his watch. Nighttime icebergs. Lightoller was in bed when the ship began to tremble violently. Sadly for Charles Lightoller and the others on the boat, the night of April 14, 1912 was just getting started. Springing out of bed, Lightoller ran to the terrace to see what was causing the shaking. He was vigilant and noticed nothing unusual when he got on deck, but he sensed something was off. He returned to his cabin to be easily located in case his crew needed him. He was told the horrifying news by another cop who stormed into his cabin at midnight. Still in his pajamas, with his officer's pants pulled loosely over the top, Lightoller ran to the deck. Joseph Boxhall, in charge of the watch, informed him that they had struck an iceberg. The watchman had discovered the ice too late, since it had been hard to detect without binoculars. After being informed of the circumstances, he moved rapidly to take action. The ship that cannot sink. Although Lightoller was slightly concerned, he was certain that everything would be well despite the crash, since he had been often told that the Titanic was unsinkable. But if Lightoller had learned anything from his catastrophic experience, it was that things might turn around very rapidly. As the evacuation got underway, anxious passengers started to flow into the night air, with Lightoller spearheading the operations on the ship's port side. He started lowering the lifeboat's occupants with his team into the frigid seas. Lightoller was strict in executing Smith's directives and only let women and children into the lifeboats. Many lifeboats were safely launched. However, many were only half filled since not enough women and children were at the head of the lines. It must be highlighted, however, that he gravely misread Smith's instruction of women and children first as limited to women and children alone. Amid the frenzy, Lightoller remained calm and instructed his staff to follow suit. Since they climbed into the lifeboats, he reassured the passengers that they were perfectly safe as there was a ship not more than a few miles away. Panic breaks out. Fear spread among the crew and passengers as the ship descended farther into the icy waters. When Lightoller arrived to begin Lifeboat B's launch, he discovered that 25 men, both crew members and passengers, were inside. Declaring that women and children had to enter the lifeboat first, he commanded the males to leave. Lightoller took out his empty handgun and threatened to kill the group if they did not get off the boat, but they refused to go. "Get out of there, you damned cowards! I'd like to see every one of you overboard," he reportedly said. The crowd went crazy, and Lightoller was fighting to keep his cool since he knew his own life might end in a matter of minutes. Lightoller refused to let billionaire John Jacob Astor board the lifeboats until all women and children had been safely evacuated, and he remained true to his instructions. Over the next 30 minutes, he labored hard, cautiously lowering some of the ship's 20 lifeboats into the ocean. It did not take long to see that not everyone would survive, and the ship sank. Not in good shape. Charles Lightoller realized he wouldn't make it out alive as things worsened. He remained with the ship and its occupants for the whole 2 hours and 40 minutes it took to sink because of his courage. At any time, Lightoller might have chosen to jump into one of the life rafts and rescue himself. But as a responsible officer, he decided to stay on board until the very last minute. Lightoller struggled to get one more lifeboat launched as the ship sank deeper into the freezing sea. He said goodbye to his fellow cops, not knowing what would happen to them. As the Titanic split, the vessel delved into the ocean below. Just before the ship submerged, Charles Lightoller dived off the bridge. Despite his best efforts, he was drawn well below the water's surface by the ship's massive weight, which created an immense suction. Even when Lightoller abandoned the bulky handgun he had strapped to his body to become lighter underwater, the ship's sinking force was still too much. For the hero, everything seemed to be over. A sign takes place. Lightoller wedged against the ship, the frigid water still dragging him under. Then, as if by magic, Lightoller was launched to the surface of the sea by a jet of hot air shot from one of the ship's ventilators, plunging from the ocean's depths. Lightoller noticed collapsible Boat B, a lifeboat drifting upside down, not distant from him, as he emerged from the water. He swam immediately to the boat and assisted the 30 people clinging to it as they climbed aboard. Strong seas rocked those in the lifeboat about in the water for several hours until Lightoller ordered them to transfer their weight until they were rescued. The RMS Carpathia arrived several hours later to rescue everybody on board the collapsible boat. The final officer to be pulled from the icy waters of the RMS Titanic was Lightoller, the highest-ranked officer on board. Lightoller's time at sea was far from ended, even after the agony of this incident. The investigation. Surprisingly, Charles Lightoller, who survived the RMS Titanic and experienced trauma, supported White Star Line's reputation throughout the examinations that followed the catastrophe. Lightoller stood up for his employer during the British inquiry into the sinking, claiming that the catastrophe was caused by the calm seas that evening. The crew could not see the icebergs in the darkness because no breaking water was at their margins. Later, Lightoller reversed his business justifications in a 1936 BBC program on the accident. Many of Lightoller's suggestions were implemented throughout the investigation, and the pre-existing safety regulations were modified. Lightoller suggested that a number of lifeboats needed on a ship be determined by its passenger and crew capacity rather than its tonnage. With the passage of this new regulation, ships were guaranteed to carry enough lifeboats for every passenger on board. In addition, he was in charge of requiring all passenger boats to have a 24-hour radio system and to communicate with one another if they saw icebergs in a certain region. Sadly, Lightoller's maritime mishaps were far from over. Putting his country first. Lightoller returned to work for White Star Line as a first mate aboard the HMS Oceanic after the Titanic disaster. The HMS Oceanic was transformed into a battleship when World War I broke out, and Lieutenant Charles Lightoller, who had just been promoted, was called up to serve in the Royal Naval Reserve. He served on this vessel until it grounded and sank in 1914 on a rock in the Shetland archipelago of Scotland's Shoals of Foula. Lightoller was sent to serve on other warships after this event, even holding the command position on 2 of them. Tragedy and destruction greeted Lightoller once again as the roaring conflict left. He was the commander of the HMS Falcon in 1918 when it sank due to a collision with another ship in dense fog. Lightoller avoided death in the crash once again. Lightoller was soon back on his feet and on the verge of doing something that would make him a hero, having already gained admiration for his guts. From mariner to commander of the Navy. Charles Lightoller had shown his courage and readiness to risk his own life to save others by surviving the Titanic catastrophe and 2 disasters during World War I. As the First World War concluded, Commander Charles Lightoller, who had gained experience, was assigned to command HMS Gary, a destroyer ship. The destroyer ship gained notoriety for its triumph when it collided with and sank the German U-boat SMUB-110. By the war's conclusion, Lightoller's accomplishments as the ship's lieutenant commander won him a coveted honor. An honorable hero. Lieutenant Charles Lightoller's valiant and exceptional actions throughout the war won him much respect. He was hailed for his bravery and significant efforts, and he acquired 2 merit medals for his services in battle. Commander Lightoller resigned from the Navy in 1919 after his extraordinary 10-year survival. After the war, Lightoller became well known as a military hero. After so many disasters at sea, one would think the commander would be ready to hang up his boots. Lightoller, however, saw the water as his home and continued to sort out tasks in his cherished sector. But this was just going to turn out to be an unexpected letdown. The breadwinner in the family. Despite being released from the Navy, Lightoller still needed to find employment quickly since he had a small family. Over the years, he and his wife Sylvia had 5 children, and he was the only one who could support them financially. He attempted to return to White Star Line, but soon found it would not be simple. The commander thought he would have no trouble obtaining employment since he was more than skilled in his profession, especially after being at sea for over 20 years. Unfortunately, Lightoller's background worked against him. Rather than helping him in his quest, his experience caused obstacles. Fear and superstitions. Lightoller quickly discovered that the industry no longer welcomed him or any other RMS Titanic crew members still alive. Few jobs were available, even at White Star Line, and there were limited opportunities for growth or promotion. The world was abuzz with rumors of the ship's collapse, and superstition was rife. Given that the ship's crew was the same as the Titanic's, who would want to join it? Thus, Lightoller abandoned the nautical career he had always led and departed from White Star Line. With his family to support and bills to pay, the graying commander seemed nearer his day's end. He worked as a property speculator, an innkeeper, and a poultry farmer. Not quite the lucrative job he was accustomed to. Even though Lightoller's future seemed dismal, genius still awaited him. He was only unaware of it now. the Titanic, and other watercraft. Charles Lightoller believed that people would be interested in hearing about his life, which had been full of victories and setbacks. He wrote an autobiography in the 1930s that described his extraordinary life. The book was a huge hit since many people were interested in learning about this man's amazing experience. He called it Titanic and Other Ships. However, his time at sea was not yet done. The money from his well-received book allowed him to fulfill a lifelong desire. After buying their yacht, Charles Lightoller and his wife Sylvia intended to cruise Europe in search of some much-needed serenity. They named the boat Sundowner and had an absolute blast exploring northern Europe for the following 10 years. They had no idea that their period of tranquility would not last. The English government had called the couple on a top-secret assignment. Travelers in disguise. Once again, there were rumors of war going across Europe, and the English Navy required the assistance of this old couple. To gather information on the movements of the German army, they enlisted the retired soldier and his spouse to undertake a number of covert operations. It was the ideal disguise since the pair seemed to bystanders to be merely an old couple on vacation. The Lightollers monitored the German shore closely and shared whatever intelligence they could. Tensions were running high in 1939 when the pair was unexpectedly summoned back to England just in time for the Second World War to break out. Charles Lightoller, weary of fighting and bloodshed, disappeared for the first year of the war to tend his farm in England. However, as the fighting became more intense, Lightoller felt compelled to serve and left retirement to make one more appearance in the Allied forces. The Dynamo Operation. In 1940, the German army invaded France, driving thousands of soldiers from the Allied forces to the beaches of Dunkirk in the northwest of the country. The German army was approaching quickly, and the Allies were surrounded by the water. They were essentially sitting ducks. The Allies were ill-prepared and worn out from months of fighting when they overestimated the might of the approaching army. The situation had become worse as they had no other alternatives and nowhere to hide. With hopes of saving even 10,000 of the 300,000 men who had gotten stuck, the Allies came up with a bold scheme. In the hopes of rescuing some of the stranded troops and returning them to safety, they would dispatch as many boats as they could across the English Channel to France. Charles Lightoller, our hero, steps in at this point. One last task. Lightoller was clearly no longer a youthful guy at 66, but he stepped up to the plate when he was called to say he was needed. At Dunkirk, civilian boats were required to transport soldiers between the English and French coasts. The Allies needed all the assistance they could get since it was the last minute. To try the rescue, hundreds of tiny sailboats and recreational vessels were used. Most of them were captured by the Navy, which then transported them to the port where they would depart. Operation Dynamo was the name given to the rescue operation, which was going to be one of the most audacious and amazing operations in history. As a Navy veteran himself, Charles Lightoller was more than pleased to donate his boat to the cause. But he did have one condition: the Dunkirk beaches. Given his extensive background in marine and naval operations, Commander Charles Lightoller was unlikely to pass up the opportunity to perform a once-in-a-lifetime rescue. He asks to be allowed to carry the Sundowner to the beaches of Dunkirk personally, feeling that he might still be of great use to the Navy at his age. The retiring hero was given permission by the Allies to serve one more time. Lightoller sailed for the shores of Dunkirk with his oldest son, Roger, a military officer, and a young sea scout named Gerald Ashcroft at his side. As was typical of Charles Lightoller's life, things didn't go exactly as planned. They came across a burning and sinking motor cruiser while en route to the rescue. After saving the shocked crew of the sinking ship, they carried on toward their objective. The Reprieve. After a while, the tiny crew reached the shores of Dunkirk and started organizing the trapped soldiers into the 58-foot boat. Although Lightoller's boat was only authorized to accommodate 21 people, he crammed as many men as he could into it, since it was literally a matter of life or death. When the boat was fully occupied, 75 soldiers were crammed into the tiny cabin, and an additional 55 were taking cover on the deck. As a seasoned sailor, Lightoller took on as many men as he felt he could manage. This guy could not be stopped. So they set off for the safety of the English coasts, packing 130 men aboard the little boat. The crew boldly set sail despite the possibility of encountering hostile fire on their return. A dangerous return trip. With the constant danger of attack, Charles Lightoller skillfully sailed his ship back across the English Channel. As they flew over wide seas, German bombers dropped bomb after bomb, thankfully missing the boat. Together, the group resisted assaults from other ships. Gerald Ashcroft later remembered, "We attracted the attention of a Stuka dive bomber. Commander Lightoller stood up in the bow, and I stood alongside the wheelhouse. Commander Lightoller kept his eye on the Stuka till the last second, then he sang out to me, 'Hard a port,' and we turned very sharply. The bomb landed on our starboard side." The Sundowner successfully landed on the English coast without incident, much to the joy of the crew and passengers. The rescued soldiers were very appreciative. Once again, Charles Lightoller emerged as the story's protagonist, giving selflessly to his fellow soldiers in time of need in order to save their lives. And he was far from ready to quit. Not a second to waste. After his successful trip to the coast of Dunkirk, Lightoller was primed to go back and rescue other men who had been stuck. He fixed the stocks on his boat and prepared to try a second rescue. But when he asked the Navy for approval, he received some unsatisfactory information. He was informed that it would not be feasible, despite his willingness to cross the perilous crossing once again and save more of the trapped soldiers. The enemy was closing in on the operation, and every minute the waters became more crowded and dangerous. As a result, only vessels capable of exceeding 20 knots were allowed to make a second trip back to Dunkirk. He might still, however, make a contribution to the military effort. Charles Lightoller's legacy. The altruistic deeds of Charles Lightoller throughout the 20th century will live on in history. His sailboat, the Sundowner, was lauded as one of the little ships of Dunkirk, a fleet of more than 850 private ships that contributed to the rescue effort at Dunkirk and helped to save the lives of more than 330,000 soldiers from the Allied forces. Lightoller went back to his farm after reaching dry ground, but the Navy kept ownership of his boat until the conclusion of the war. The family eventually received the yacht back in 1946 after the war's conclusion, and they continued to use it as their getaway vessel for weekends and vacations. Charles Lightoller's life went back to normal, or as normal as it could go for such an amazing guy. A harmonious conclusion. After all the hoopla of World War II, Lightoller's life finally started to quiet down. He moved on to own a small boatyard in West London that produced small motorboats for the water police, always having his heart in the water. His contributions to the Titanic rescue and his accomplishments throughout the world wars were highly remembered. He has sometimes given interviews on these subjects. Always modest, Lightoller gave anyone who inquired a kind retelling of his extraordinary life tale. Charles Lightoller, aged 78, died on December 8, 1952, from a persistent cardiac disease. 3 days into the Great Smog of London, which claimed the lives of an estimated 12,000 people, Lightoller, a lifetime smoker, passed away. After his cremation, his ashes were dispersed in the Commonwealth Garden of Remembrance in Richmond, Surrey. Passed away, but not forgotten. Charles Lightoller's extraordinary life of bravery and adventure has been captured in several movies and narratives in the decades that have passed since his death. The character, Mr. Dawson, in Christopher Nolan's 2017 film Dunkirk, was inspired by Lightoller's incredible narrative. This wasn't the first occasion Lightoller received recognition. The narrative of the horrific catastrophe and the late Charles Lightoller are both portrayed in the internationally acclaimed blockbuster James Cameron's 1997 film Titanic. In the movie, actor Jonathan Phillips portrays Lightoller, demonstrating his participation in the historic events of April 14, 1912. In addition to these very successful movies, Lightoller has been portrayed in 11 more plays and movies, which have helped to immortalize a portion of his amazing life. An encouragement to all. Not only did he inspire many in Hollywood, but also many on a far more intimate level. Motivated by their father's military service, his 3 boys enlisted in the military, intending to uphold their distinguished family name. Both of his daughters were in the armed forces. One worked as a nurse, and the other in an intelligence unit. His influence persisted across the ages. A.T. Lightoller, his grandson, continued his grandfather's legacy by rising to the rank of commander in the British Navy. The selfless Charles Lightoller, a real-life superhero who saved many lives and altered history several times, will go down in history as one of the greatest heroes of the 20th century.
If you've watched the video till here, that means you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the notifications bell icon